to the Web3 Prof Podcast.
Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. I'm here with Paula Pendley, who is an attorney at Nelson Mullins. Paula, thanks so much for being with me here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So the first thing I just want to ask you is, how did you get into crypto? Tell us a little bit about your backstory.
Sure. So to answer your question, I got into it about 2020, 2021. I am a close friend. We've been best friends for a long time. Natalie Brunel, she's really well known in the Bitcoin world, but back then she was not. And she started reading a lot on it, kind of self-taught herself. I think she started reading the Bitcoin Standard. She was telling me about it. And then eventually she's like, hey, let's go to the Bitcoin conference in 2021. So we went there. She was way more knowledgeable than me at the time about Bitcoin. But we went to that conference and we were trying to promote her new podcast called Coin Stories that I think probably a little bit some of your viewers will be familiar with. But at the time it was unknown. It probably launched one episode at the time. So anyway, I got there and went with her, just kind of hyping her and her new podcast. We were getting some of the really well-known speakers in the space to go on her podcast and talk with them. And by virtue of just being there and being at the conference, that's when I really got to meet people, got to hear about Bitcoin, learned a lot about it. You probably remember this, but in COVID, everyone's stuck at home. So I felt like the crypto world, people kind of took their extra time when they're sitting at home learning about it. And so that's essentially how I got into the space. I've been a lawyer, a litigator since 2010. And when I was trying to think, because I was going to these Bitcoin meetups and Bitcoin conferences and meeting all these people. And I was trying to think, how could I help with my trade, with legally, and how could I, what kind of legal issues are people in the Bitcoin world facing? And I'd had some experience doing a lot of nuisance litigation in federal court in North Carolina. So when, institutional miners, public miners were starting to have some issues, they have retained me to help them, navigate those. And so that's really what I do now. And that's kind of my origin story and how I got here and how I'm now representing Bitcoin miners.
Oh, that's great. 2020, 2021 were some great years. We saw a lot of people enter the cycle. So when we look at the legality of Bitcoin mining in the United States, can you walk us through the landscape and maybe even explain a little bit of the intersection between state laws and federal laws, and some areas in which friction is created?
Yeah, sure. So in the U.S., we don't really have a unified federal framework governing just Bitcoin mining. There's no single federal law that governs just the Bitcoin mining world, but the regulation is really primarily state driven. So, and that's also something that's part of this current administration that we have here in America. With Trump's administration, it's really trying to put a lot of the power back into the states, and kind of the federal government's not necessarily has the policy of not encroaching on states' rights. So you'll see some states like Texas, which is where I am, and Wyoming have taken these proactive steps. Not just those two states, but they're Arkansas and Florida have done so as well. It's taken proactive steps to attract miners to the state. And, just promoting business friendly energy market, digital asset rights, custody rights, things like that, where you'll have other states, such as New York. New York has imposed moratoriums on certain types of Bitcoin mining, and California, it's some other states that are not welcoming the Bitcoin mining to their state. So when you asked me about where's the friction. And the friction really is not necessarily between federal and state, we're seeing it mostly between state and local governments and local municipalities and those politicians in their counties and parishes if you're in Louisiana, certain areas like that. So for example, states have invited these miners, right, to the states, offering all these incentives and cheap energy to bring them in, and business-friendly laws. But you have, local environmental agencies and other politicians in certain counties that really have other agendas, essentially. And so we've seen like counties and cities that are trying to really weaponize zoning ordinances in their areas and permitting delays and, using the general nuisance law, which is a lot of what I do, to kind of restrict otherwise illegal business and legal mining activity from operating. And so that's where the litigation is kind of happening that we see here in America. So the friction's less federal preemption and more about kind of local pushback against just state energy or economic policy. For miners, for my clients, the legal clarity, varies dramatically by geography and so by state. And so you kind of have to, when you're preparing the infrastructure or bringing it to a certain state, you really have to plan around that kind of uncertainty and build in that kind of litigation risk.
So are the municipalities or the regional districts or these regional governments, are they allowed to have these types of restrictions on Bitcoin mining? Or is this really what your job is to go in and challenge these restrictions?
Well, yeah, sure, we do challenge the restrictions, but there's a lot of steps there. Certain lawmakers can be under pressure from environmental activists. And, these activists are also really adept at using the media to shape public perception. So the loudest voices in this debate about Bitcoin mining as a threat to the environment and things like that isn't really as compelling or polarizing of a story than they make it out to be. But for us, we have to fight back on that narrative. And that's kind of where policy plays a role, and where litigators end up, kind of helping drive the law and protect the miners and kind of pull back the wool on some of these narratives and these headlines about environmental, issues that they have. So, our job now is to educate the lawmakers in these small areas and get them to be on our side and understand it. So that when they're going to make the laws, that they are fully educated on the Bitcoin miner side. And then if there's any kind of breakdown in the law, then that's when litigation usually ensues. And that's when I get involved.
So you said one of our jobs is to make sure that these lawmakers are educated. Is that something that you're actually doing? Or are you referring to just the Bitcoin community should be educating and trying to kind of advocate?
Yeah, I'm talking about, the Satoshi funds, the Texas Blockchain Council, the Bitcoin Policy Institute. Those are really, those kind of lawyers deal directly with the lawmakers, and those trade organizations deal directly with the lawmakers. I'm not necessarily, me personally, I'm not necessarily involved in the law, in going to my politicians and things like that. I really get involved in my job, and sweet spot is, when there's any kind of conflict or debate, I get involved before litigation starts. Absolutely. We try to mitigate risk when we can, but, I advise miners on how, based on what we have right now, the knowledge that we have, the laws that are in place or the lack thereof, I help them mitigate risk and head that off from the beginning, and then help them if it does, unfortunately go to any kind of litigation.
I would imagine when the miners are thinking about entering a market, they're looking at, the energy costs, they're looking at maybe using some type of regenerative energy. and then also the legal framework in the region. Is that kind of what you're seeing as kind of some of the three main considerations?
Yeah. They want to be in a business friendly state. They want to be welcome. They want to be near abundant, cheap energy. They want to, and that's really what's drawn a ton of them to Texas, is the cheap, abundant energy and the tax incentives for industry to move here.
How do you see U.S. regulations compare to other international approaches when it comes to mining, especially countries that have banned mining versus those who have outright embraced it?
Yeah. Well, U.S. is still like a favorable jurisdiction compared to the outright bans that you see in places like China, right? But we're not like as probably streamlined or proactive. We're getting there, but maybe not as much as, say, like El Salvador. Salvador's completely embraced Bitcoin, integrating it into their national economy and everything. So with the United States being like state-centric and putting a lot of control back into the states, that kind of offers a middle ground. So it allows for like regional experimentation, but of course it results in like some regulatory inconsistency. So I guess what U.S. sets itself apart is that we don't like really have like some national stance on it. But also, I think that's generally changing with this current administration that we have. But it does allow here in America for state level innovation and state run operations. Like a miner in New York is facing a very different legal reality than one in, say, West Texas, right? So builders just need to understand the policies and laws that are specific to the state where they're building, and then kind of assess the risk if you build outside of, say, quote unquote, a friendly state. So anyway, you just have to kind of evaluate simply what does it make economic sense to do it here versus somewhere else. And
if you were to take the states that are progressive, like Texas and Wyoming, and compare them to other countries as if they were their own country, and we hear about people mining in Uruguay and Paraguay, and obviously El Salvador, and maybe some mining happening in East Africa, Kazakhstan. What is it like? Because from the outside, not being an American, it seems like it's very, very favorable to mine in a couple states right now.
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. I haven't necessarily like compared, Texas versus what's going on when they're mining in like Africa or something like that. But like overall, I think you have a good sense of what, Texas is really, we have Governor Abbott here, and he has been very public about inviting mining to the state. And so, yeah, overall, I think, places like I guess probably, I don't know if New Mexico is as great, but I'm like Texas, where I'm located. It's very welcoming. It's very positive. It's not to say there's not local governments or certain cities or counties that are going to push back, claiming, environmental impacts and, it's taking down the grid and all these other headlines. But overall, the sense of it is of mining here, and not just like Bitcoin mining. We're talking like AI data center infrastructure. The state in particular is very inviting to it and welcoming.
So there's obviously this debate that you referenced about the environmental impacts of Bitcoin mining, which, as Bitcoiners, we often are either debating against or maybe dismissive because we believe it's just unfounded. So in this growing debate, how are lawmakers balancing environmental concerns with miners' rights and energy's rights to produce Bitcoin blocks?
Well, at the core of that is some like constitutional tension. So there's private property and commercial use rights versus public interest and environmental health. So like they really have to we really have to do, the mining industries, when I say we, pull back the wool and show that there really isn't the same kind of threat that the headlines claim. So there's actually he's an environmental researcher. His name's Daniel Batten. He's done a lot of work about debunking headlines that say things like, it's boiling the lakes and the waters. There's all these like headlines that, anti-Bitcoin mining, anti-energy. It's, it's not good for the environment and all these things. So, I wouldn't do as great of a job explaining all this research, but he's done a lot in debunking some of those headlines. And so, right now the policy conversation is kind of being driven by fear and not facts. So, Bitcoin's not a fringe activity anymore. It's an industrial infrastructure, and it's creating jobs in rural areas. It's using otherwise stranded energy. It's operating at the heart of really Texas anyway. It's like energy system. So the question really isn't whether to regulate it. It's just how to regulate it. And unfortunately, there's just too many policy conversations that start with mining is an energy hog because it's catchy and it sounds ominous. Right. And but it's really wrong if you unpack it. Like, mining is energy intensive, of course, right? But unlike most industrial operations, miners are flexible and they can ramp down and can shut off in seconds. You can't get like a hospital to do something like that. So, or like any kind of other factory to do something like that. So what does this mean in practice? So miners can absorb that excess energy when the demand is low, and then they can curtail it when the grid is stressed. And so that's not energy hogging. That's like helping, right? And so in Texas, like during peak demand hours, miners will regularly curtail to give energy back to the grid. And they do this automatically. They can do it quickly. And we're on what's called ERCOT, it's electric reliability of Texas. Essentially, it's a private energy. It's runs 90% of the grid here in Texas. And so it's it's part of the ERCOT's demand response program. So they are, they're increasingly paid, not punished, for the value that they add. And the miners are then co-located with renewable generation. So they're soaking up energy that would otherwise be wasted. So when all these critics are saying Bitcoin is incompatible with climate goals, they're really kind of missing the story there. They're able to use the excess energy. Otherwise, it's just, wasted. And so the regulatory landscape, and the reason why it's kind of become like a little bit of a mess is because mining policy, like I was saying, is mostly local, and that some states, like Wyoming, Texas, are friendly, and you have other ones that think it's like toxic waste. So even within like one state, we see counties or towns, like here, even in Texas, even though it's welcoming all these miners, like we see counties and towns that pass these new noise ordinances without really understanding the technology. So there's like no differentiation between like an air cooling miner versus an immersion cooling miner. There's like no recognition of how the sound can be mitigated with like certain investments. So you have like inconsistent zoning rules, you have permitting delays, you have vague like curtailment protocols. And so there just needs to be more guidance. And then where regulation ends up becoming unclear, which is what I was telling you, is that's when litigation ends up filling the gap. So we see a rise in these like noise nuisance claims, for example, because plaintiffs will allege that there's like noise coming from these air-cooled miners, and claiming that it's like substantial and unreasonably interfering with the use and enjoyment of their property. And so we're seeing a lot of those kind of like environmental type lawsuits claiming that these mining harms the environment. It's like making all the animals from rural areas disappear, but it's not really considering all the first of all, these are all claims, but they're not backed up by any fact. These are mainly speculative claims.
Right.
And when you really look at it, they've been unable to date prove that. And so anyway, it kind of could become like a little bit chaotic without like clear documentation and like from like a smart regulation. So which would just essentially be like, you need clarity, consistency, and some kind of technical grounding. So anyway, I know there's like a long answer to your question, but for noise regulation anyway, it should be based on objective sound measurements that consider newer, quieter technologies. Blanket bans don't protect anyone, right? They're just going to push like all the jobs away and the economic benefits. And when you have like these industries come into certain areas, they provide they inject a lot of money into these communities with like with the taxes that they have to pay. So, they're already incentivized to locate near renewables and participate in the demand response. So I don't know, if you like zoom out, it's not, it's mainly about a political issue and not really electrical issue.
It's interesting that they're addressing a noise being the issue. I've not heard that before. Are these miners, if they're co-located beside renewables, I can't imagine these are like in residential communities and things like that.
Right. Like, so you're correct. Like for the most part, these they're put in pretty remote locations. Every now and again, though, you'll have a power plant, right, that is set up and it's been zoned as an industrial area. It's an industrial zone. The power plant's been there since like the early 2000s. But all of a sudden, a miner comes and builds right next to this power plant. And then the community is in, an uproar. And you have to kind of think about, well, why is that? You've had this huge, power plant, imposing power plant that also makes its own sounds. You're next to a highway. Literally, it runs along a highway. But you'll have communities upset about it. And I think, when you get down to it, they find that, digital currency is in some way like a boogeyman, so to speak, because they can't quite intuitively understand what it is and what it's doing and why it's being operated. And they don't want it. All they think is, oh my gosh, it's using our home prices are going to go down and our energy bills are going to go up and all these things, which hasn't borne out. Those are just like headlines and like speculation. But
right.
But yeah, there are people that live near an industrial site and they'll be okay with that. But then something they don't understand being next to it, they will not be okay with. And it's really trying to get to the bottom of that and understand why, and, but yeah, there are definitely you'll see some headlines on, noise and things like that being in a neighborhood. And it's, it can be a sparse neighborhood. They're obviously not being built in the middle of like a community, like a gated community or anything, but they will be somewhat near some homes, and you only need like 5 people to be really loud, be the loudest voices.
Yeah. Can regulators legally restrict miners' access to energy or impose some type of unique tariffs? Are there constitutional or legal grounds for miners to challenge these rules?
Yes. So, and I'm not like a constitutional scholar or anything, but in theory, regulators can impose restrictions, but the restrictions have to be neutral. They can't be discriminatory. They have to be grounded in like a legitimate state interest. So the measures have to comply with constitutional protections. And so if a miner is being singled out for using electricity while other like commercial or industrial users are not, that does raise a serious legal issue. So a regulator can't disproportionately target a miner without like a compelling state interest. So You've got like constitutional guardrails there for like the equal protection under the 14th Amendment. You got due process laws. You have to have notice and a clear rule and an opportunity to be heard. And then there's like the takings clause, which is like part of our Fifth Amendment. But anyway, so state utility commissions, they have to regulate fairly, and they target Bitcoin miners and just like specifically based on like ideology and like misinformation or whatever. Then yeah, there's legal pushback there, and so in some ways you'll see that, but it's usually, there's good legal ground to challenge that kind of bias type legislation.
What are some of the biggest legal risks that individual or institutional miners face, and how can they mitigate some of these issues proactively?
So a lot of legal risks to miners isn't necessarily like unique to the mining industry. It can be like any innovative company, any big industry. Sorry, I'm getting emails. But so I guess like the legal risk that like an institutional miner or an individual miner is going to be kind of the same as a risk that big industry faces, which is, and regulatory overreach, uncertainty, permitting, zoning hostility, media hostility, contractual disputes, around like power purchase agreements or like hosting contracts. So like to mitigate that kind of risk, obviously engage legal counsel early, but it means like really like proactively securing like the right, like land use entitlements, contracts of building contingencies for curtailment, negotiating like indemnity agreements in your contracts. And then like on the, say, like litigation side, you just have to be prepared for like certain lawsuits, especially in areas where you think the environmental narratives are being weaponized for political gain, because that's also like a challenge here is, politicians need a platform to run on. And when there's that kind of, narrative and them versus us, it provides an opportunity where you can represent constituents in some areas, and it ends up becoming some kind of political platform for people to run on. Like, as I was to advise any kind of legal risk for like institutional miners, is just really just staying informed about your local regulations in that particular state that you intend to operate and to build, and get in there early, talk to like get allies early to kind of help mitigate any potential legal challenges down the road.
It's interesting because the misinformation around this topic is pretty substantial. Here in Vancouver, we have a pro-Bitcoin mayor. It's actually been interviewed on your friend Natalie Brunell's podcast. So Ken Sim has tried to, propose that the city of Vancouver purchases Bitcoin as on its strategic reserve. Mm-hmm. And then also I'm involved in a proposal to heat the largest pool in Canada, the largest outdoor pool in Canada, which is here in downtown Vancouver, using Bitcoin mining energy. And there's a lot of information out there that people believe, well, Bitcoin mining is illegal in British Columbia. And, there is a moratorium on new energy to supply Bitcoin mining at a very large scale, but, when you're doing anything not industrial size, and if it's not new energy provision by our energy provider, you can do this kind of stuff. And the challenge around this is so often just trying to get people to understand that the headlines you read aren't necessarily the truth, right? And that's just and it's proven to be really challenging for the Bitcoin community. Like Daniel Batten's going to be on my podcast next week, and it seems like his work really has fundamentally been dedicated to just trying to get people to understand that what CNN says about Bitcoin mining isn't necessarily the truth. Right.
I have found in my career that the plaintiffs industry, the environmental industry, is really great and adept at using the media in their favor. And I unfortunately, on the other side, like companies and big businesses aren't necessarily, they don't use it in the same way. So, even like preparing for any kind of like lawsuit litigation, I mean, you open up the newspaper the morning of your like opening statement and see a headline that's like covering, that's like, so, that's covering this case, and it's only so one-sided. And you're like, so it's just
so discouraging.
It is discouraging. And, but I don't know. I mean, this is me just pontificating, but I like to think that, over the years, people aren't necessarily relying on like mainstream media as much for their news. And hopefully people are taking on the critical thinking of what they consume, and like taking it for what it is, understanding the source and things like that. But yeah, I mean, it's been an uphill battle. I think we have like had a momentum change, at least here in America, with like the Trump administration has been very pro Bitcoin, and pro crypto, not just Bitcoin, pro crypto. And so that's kind of, I guess, had people that in America anyway, that people that maybe would never even look at digital currencies or think it's just this is a scam or drug money or whatever they think. Now they're opening up to like, okay, well, wait a second. Like if maybe I'm more open to it. So, but of course, everything's so polarizing here in America. So if one side is for something, the other side has to be against it, whether or not it's just the way it is sometimes. So, but yeah, Daniel Batten, I met him for the first time. I was at Cheat Code, Peter McCormick's conference, a month ago. And, anyway, just like started following him, and because I saw him speak, and he's just done a great job. He's like focused on getting the other side of the story out there, which is just so critically important. And frankly, he's credible in it because I think he came from the other side. Like he was the person looking at it and saying, this is bad for the environment. And when he dug deeper, I think he changed his mind, which makes him a good, credible person.
What was it like at Cheat Code?
Oh, it was fun. It was great. It was my first one. Really well run. It's really, it's fun because it's one day too. So you're not there for 3 different days of a conference and jumping around everything like you kind of are at the Bitcoin conferences, like the big one. But yeah, so it has really high signal people speaking, and then it's fun because everyone's on vacation for the most part. Everyone's in Bedford and London, and everyone's in high spirits. And you can watch his football team, football over there, which kind of makes it like a fun weekend.
Oh, that's great. If the U.S. were to draft a comprehensive Bitcoin mining legislation policy for the nation, what legal principles of protection would you argue should be included for this to be fair and also innovative?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. There are organizations like trade organizations that really focus on crafting bills and to kind of shape the laws. So they're, like I was saying, the Texas Blockchain Council, the Bitcoin Policy Institute, Satoshi Action Fund. I would, any viewer or listener who's listening to this, if you're wanting to look what they're doing, or what's going on, or what's the latest news in that area, I would recommend kind of looking at those sources for the progress that they're making. But for me, like specifically, just in my experience as just a litigator, there has to be model laws because that cover Bitcoin mining, because the issue is like there are no specific laws related to Bitcoin mining generally. So there's nuisance litigation, it's been around forever, right? But the laws, even in Texas, haven't contemplated Bitcoin mining and an industrial zone using, and we even, in one of my cases, even one of the federal judges in his order specifically said there's no precedent for this. We're going to send it back down to the state court. And so it was in a federal court in a removal case, and it was removed, and then it was remanded back to state court because essentially the and there's a lot more nuance there, but they were just like, there's no legal precedent. So I just think having the model laws in there, because what ends up happening when there's no laws, then litigation kind of makes the laws and creates the precedent. So if you draft a law to protect the miners' rights now, then it will mitigate any lawsuits in the future, because someone will be discouraged from bringing a lawsuit because they will have the law to look to. And same for the other side. They will have the defense that they need instead of kind of a more creative legal advocacy at this point, because there's just not something very clear. So so I don't know. I mean, let's just making it a legitimate industrial activity, by Bitcoin mining is protect against any discriminatory regulations that we were kind of talking about earlier, which is like unfairly targeting it versus other industries. Explaining the energy integration of it. I think that's a big part of it. Policies should incentivize miners to use the excess renewable energy, which I think they are, but it should be coded. I don't do this because I'm not a tax person, but like tax guidelines to, tax regulations for miners, offer clarity. And then of course there's going to be a side of like IP side of everything where like data collection practices should be, shouldn't, compromise competitive advantage for the industry.
What are you most excited about living in Texas or even broadly in the United States regarding Bitcoin mining, in the upcoming few years?
Yeah, I just, I don't know. The momentum, like we were even talking about at the beginning before, I don't even know if we went live yet, but, it's hit another all-time high. It's exciting. And I think when that makes the news, it gets people more involved and they want to self-educate. So I don't know. I'm really excited. I know right now they're even talking about some AI and Bitcoin integration. Not quite totally familiar on all that, but just the innovative technology on it I just think it's a really exciting time. And I think the innovation is going to continue to grow, and it just seems like we have a good momentum here. That's
great. Paula, where can people learn more about you and the work that you're involved in?
Well, I work at a law firm called Nelson Mullins. We're an international. We have international ties, but we're mainly a U.S. based, but we do a lot of work internationally as well. But we have offices all over the country. I'm in the Dallas one, so you can find me at nelsonmullins.com. And again, my name is Paula Pendley. I'm also on Twitter as I think Legally Bitcoin, and same on Instagram. But mainly if if obviously you have legal questions or legal consultations or anything like that, reach out to me at my law firm. Yeah, email address. It's paula.pendley@nelsonmullins.com.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Paula. This has been a super interesting conversation. I appreciate you spending some time with me.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me.